We had already decided their fate before they ever spoke. In the upper chamber of the Galactic Council, beneath vaults of crystal light and ancient banners that recorded 1,000 extinct empires, Earth was nothing more than a line item, a peripheral system, a young, noisy species confined to a volatile world. Short-lived bipeds who argued with themselves as often as they fought their environment. I remember the tone of the discussion, casual, almost bored. "They are divided," one counselor said, his frills rippling with amusement. "Emotionally unstable," another added. Laughter followed. Not cruel laughter, worse, dismissive laughter. I was there as an observer, my species tasked with recording proceedings for historical continuity. I recorded the vote as it was cast. Earth would be ignored, its expansion restricted, its system marked for future absorption when convenient. No urgency, no threat. The human ambassador stood alone at the center dais, small, fragile-looking, no armor, no entourage. When he requested the floor, the speaker denied it without ceremony. Protocols were cited, time constraints invoked. The human did not protest. He simply inclined his head and stepped back. That should have unsettled us. Instead, the chamber moved on. Another agenda item, another civilization postponed into irrelevance. Then the void screamed. Every sensor array in the Council's orbital ring flared simultaneously. Gravity readings spiked beyond tolerance. Navigation beacons desynchronized. For a fraction of a heartbeat, space itself seemed to inhale. And then they arrived. Not through gates, not with flares or announcements. Human vessels unfolded from hyperspace as if reality itself had been forced to make room for them. One moment, emptiness. The next, steel and shadow occupying positions with mathematical precision. Not one fleet, dozens. They emerged in silence, forming layered formations that locked into place like a solved equation. No broadcast signals, no threats, no demands. Their weapons remained powered but dormant, as if violence were an option already considered and already unnecessary. The chamber erupted into overlapping voices. Counselors shouted for clarification, for identification, for confirmation that this was not an error. I could not speak. My secondary hearts had slowed, not from panic, but from recognition. This was not improvisation. This was arrival. The human ships were wrong in ways I struggle to articulate. Asymmetrical hulls.
Reinforced scars where elegant design should have been. Armor plates mismatched, replaced, layered over older damage. These vessels had not been built to impress. They had been built to survive. I felt it then, a cold, creeping awareness. These were not ceremonial fleets. They were not symbols of power. They were tools, honed and tested, carrying the quiet confidence of something that had already endured the worst. The speaker attempted to reassert control. He demanded identification, demanded explanation. His voice echoed too loudly in the suddenly silent chamber. Only then did the human ambassador move again. He did not return to the dais. He did not raise his voice. He simply activated a single display above the chamber floor. It showed a human colony. Small, distant, peripheral, a place none of us could have named moments earlier. Then the image changed. Wreckage, debris, lifeless orbitals drifting through the dark. No accusation, no plea, just statement. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the fleets outside seemed to hold position without adjustment, as if waiting for us to understand. In that moment, clarity struck with terrifying force. Humans had not come to argue policy. They had not come to demand representation or plead for mercy. They had come because someone they loved had been touched, harmed, removed. We had mistaken their quiet diplomacy for weakness, their compliance for submission. We had not understood the rule that governs their kind, a rule written not in law, but in instinct. Ignore humans, and they endure. Limit them, and they adapt. But threaten what they cherish, and they arrive. The vote was never finalized. The speaker never called for it. No one dared. Because as we watched those scarred vessels hold their silent formation beyond the chamber walls, we understood something far worse than defeat. This was not a negotiation that had failed. It was a warning that had already been delivered. And as the human fleets waited, patient, precise, inevitable, I realized with growing dread that this was only the beginning. To understand our failure, one must first understand why humanity should not exist at all. By every metric our sciences respect, Earth was a mistake that survived too long. A planet racked by instability, its crust fractured and restless, its skies capable of annihilation, its oceans both cradle and executioner. Entire regions could become uninhabitable within a single planetary cycle.
Even without external threats, Earth was hostile to life that dared to settle upon it. And yet, humans did not merely survive there, they thrived. Our predictive models are unforgiving. Species that evolve on volatile worlds tend toward early extinction or rigid stagnation. Adaptability has limits. Biology bends only so far before it breaks. Humanity should have broken repeatedly. Instead, they bent again and again, until bending became identity. What unsettled our historians most was not Earth's environment, but humanity itself. Humans waged constant conflict against their own kind. Ideologies fractured them, borders shifted endlessly. They inflicted horrors upon one another with a creativity that disturbed even our most seasoned analysts. No unified species could endure such internal erosion for long. And yet, they did. Where we expected collapse, humans produced systems. Where we predicted extinction, they generated redundancy. Scarcity did not erase them, it refined them. Lacking resources, they learned efficiency. Facing famine, they mastered cultivation. When disease spread, they turned suffering into science. War to humans was not merely destruction, it was a brutal forge. Coordination under fire, logistics under collapse, communication under chaos. Every conflict taught them how to move faster, think sharper, protect harder. We classified them as emotionally volatile, and we were correct, but catastrophically incomplete. Human emotion is not a weakness to be eliminated, it is an energy source. Loss does not still them, it activates them. Grief becomes momentum, rage becomes focus, love becomes something dangerously close to invincibility. They do not forget their dead, they carry them. I spent cycles studying humanity's earliest transmissions, records they sent into the void long before anyone answered. We expected messages of pride, declarations of conquest, pleas for recognition. Instead, we found songs. Songs recorded in ruined cities, voices echoing through broken structures while fires burned beyond the frame. Stories whispered to children as extinction loomed outside sealed shelters. Narratives about hope, told not because hope was reasonable, but because it was necessary. Humans narrate themselves forward. Even when the future is ash, they speak as if something will come after. That habit alone should have warned us. Other species adapt by minimizing pain. Humans adapt by remembering it. They build monuments, not to victories, but to tragedies, so the cost is never abstract. Their past is not buried, it is weaponized, sharpened into resolve. That was our second great error. We saw their scarred history and mistook it for fragility. We believed Earth's disasters had weakened them, distracted them, slowed them. We never considered the possibility that catastrophe had been rehearsal. Every storm taught evacuation. Every war taught mobilization. Every collapse taught recovery. Human civilization was not a straight ascent. It was a series of near extinctions survived through stubborn refusal to end. When humans finally reached beyond their system, they did not carry illusions of safety. They carried expectations of loss. They assumed things would go wrong and prepared accordingly. That is why their ships look the way they do. That is why their doctrines emphasize redundancy over elegance. That is why their commanders train for failure as the default condition. They had already lived through their apocalypse many times over. So when the universe finally turned its attention toward Earth with indifference, hostility, and quiet cruelty, humans did not react with shock. They reacted with familiarity. This was not their first hostile environment, not their first existential threat, not their first time standing at the edge of disappearance. They did what they had always done. They endured, and once endurance was no longer enough, they advanced. First contact was deceptive in its simplicity. The humans arrived with vessels that were small by our standards, unarmed and visually unthreatening. They did not attempt to impress. They did not flare their superiority. Their ambassadors stepped aboard the council stations with smiles, gestures of friendship, and words we could almost mistake for naivete. Endless expressions of cooperation, invitations to trade knowledge, to share science, to exchange art. Polite, too polite. Our diplomats were confounded. Some chuckled, others sighed with relief. A young species eager to please, easy to control, compliant. These were the descriptors tossed about to chamber. Provisional status was granted without hesitation. Trade lanes were restricted. Exploration permits were tightly controlled. Oversight committees formed to monitor them. We thought we had built a cage with golden bars, and the humans walked right through it. They accepted every restriction, every condition, every oversight, with gratitude,
with humility, with patience. That should have alarmed us. It did not. Instead, we basked in our presumed superiority, failing to notice what they were doing while appearing compliant. They asked questions, but not about power structures or the limits of our weaponry. No, they asked about logistics, about resource distribution, about rescue protocols and evacuation procedures. They studied our borders, our patrol patterns, our communication loops. They thanked us for information we didn't even realize we had shared. Some of us felt unease, a low, persistent sense that something was off, but we ignored it. Reverence, admiration, curiosity, that was our interpretation. We called it polite reconnaissance, a harmless habit of a young species. Then the incident occurred. A peripheral human colony vanished under so-called pirate action. The council debated jurisdiction, responsibilities, and punitive measures. Weeks passed as our deliberations stalled. Humans waited. Precisely 72 hours. Then they acted. Without announcement, without spectacle, no propaganda broadcast, no posturing. Pirate fleets disappeared. Entire installations erased. Not a single survivor remained. Not a single wreck left adrift. And when the galaxy finally registered what had occurred, the humans issued no threat, only one statement, calm and devoid of emotion. We have resolved the matter. We told ourselves it was coincidence, a fluke, lucky timing, an aberration, comfort over clarity, denial over understanding. We had misread them. Humans do not posture. They do not bluff. They respond, and every response is calibrated. We would learn, later than we should have, that resolution is not a gesture. It is an execution of intent, and intent, in human terms, is absolute. There was a day the galaxy would remember, though no one knew it at the time. It began quietly with what should have been a routine tragedy, the carry-on incident, they called it. Civilians aboard, innumerable, scattered, unarmed, including children. The council responded in the expected fashion: condolences, condemnations, procedural statements. Humanity responded with silence. No outrage, no demand, no protests, just silence. We should have feared that quiet. Days passed, weeks, and then, slowly, systems across that region began to fail. Supply routes that had operated for centuries collapsed. Communications, both civilian and military, ceased to function. Entire strategic worlds found themselves isolated, stranded in the void, without a single human vessel in sight. And yet, they did not kill. They did not launch assaults on populations. They did not seize territories. They struck at infrastructure, logistics hubs, transport networks, command arrays, tools that enabled cruelty, corruption, and oppression. They dismantled the systems that allowed suffering to propagate, leaving people alive, disoriented, and yet increasingly protected from harm. It was horrifying, not in its brutality, but in its restraint. Precision without spectacle, efficiency without bloodlust. Humans acted as if the universe itself were a machine in need of correction, and they were the only ones qualified to repair it. Then came the broadcast. One single transmission across known space. Not a threat, not a demand, not a claim of conquest. only a statement of principle. We do not seek dominion, we do not seek conquest, but where survival is denied by negligence, by malice, or by bureaucracy, we intervene. The galaxy paused. For the first time, species accustomed to hierarchy, aggression, and expansion began to whisper, "They are not tyrants." We were wrong. Humans are not aspirants for power. They are unwilling guardians. Guardians who do not ask for permission to save what they love. And from that day forward, every system, every council, every empire learned a simple, terrifying truth. Humanity's intervention is not negotiable. It is inevitable. And the silence that preceded it was only the calm before the storm of resolution. Officially, there was no war. No declarations, no flags raised, no alliances convened. Yet in the months that followed the Carry-On incident, entire regimes dissolved as if the universe itself had quietly pulled their foundations from beneath them. Slaver empires awoke to empty docks, entire fleets vanished overnight. Predator species discovered their command hierarchies annihilated, every node of communication severed with surgical precision. Humanity did not fight for territory. They did not seek conquest. They fought for outcomes, specific, measurable, necessary outcomes. Where life was endangered, systems were corrected. Where suffering was inflicted, it was terminated. Their military doctrine was unlike anything we had cataloged. There were no rigid chains of command.
Units operated with contextual autonomy, making decisions independently, yet harmonized with a shared understanding of ethics, priorities, and intent. One human commander could redirect a fleet mid-battle based on observation alone, and others would adjust seamlessly, as though guided by a singular consciousness. Predictability, a tool we relied upon, was now their vulnerability. Humans were chaotic to those who assumed linear control, unstoppable to those who relied on rigid order. Captives, those foolish enough to be caught, spoke freely of what they witnessed. They expected glory or domination, perhaps intimidation, but humans spoke differently. They spoke of responsibility, of promises made to civilians they would never meet again. They spoke of duty and preservation, not triumph. This was not escalation. This was conclusion. When humans engaged, they were not testing, not posturing. They were executing. Every strike had purpose. Every maneuver was measured. Civilizations that once relied on fear or intimidation were dismantled, not in spectacle, but in inevitability. We cataloged the devastation and called it warfare. Humans did not. To them, war was not identity, not ritual, not sport. It was obligation. We understood this truth too late. Humans do not conquer. They correct. They do not escalate. They conclude. And once the conclusion begins, resistance is irrelevant. The coalition fleet assembled with arrogance and certainty. Dozens of species, hundreds of ships, a force so overwhelming it was meant to erase the human problem in a single coordinated strike. War rooms buzzed with calculated assurance. Strategists wrote posthumous histories. Propaganda was drafted in anticipation of victory. But they never reached Earth. Human intelligence had anticipated every vector, every tactic, every contingency. They did not wait to defend their homeworld. They did not gather fleets to repel invaders above populated cities. Humans intercepted the coalition in the voids between star systems, far from inhabited planets, far from collateral consequence. The battle that followed was unlike any conflict recorded in galactic history. Swift, asymmetric, devastating. Human vessels endured strikes that would have shattered others, their hulls absorbing, bending, and continuing forward as if the very laws of physics conspired to allow their passage. Entire squadrons fell to enemy fire, yet the formation held.
Damage was counted, noted, and compensated for in real-time strategy that seemed impossible to comprehend. I witnessed a flagship, an enormous, scarred vessel, lose propulsion in the midst of an enemy dreadnought's barrage. And then, impossibly, it rammed the enemy. Its mass became a weapon, a shield for civilian transport corridors, perfectly timed, perfectly executed. I recorded every metric of destruction, but the human crews did not speak of heroics. There were no celebrations, no broadcast of their deeds, only the continuation of the mission, the quiet fulfillment of obligation. Earth remained untouched, unaware, oblivious to the scale of the threat it had survived. The humans carried the weight alone, the responsibility, the cost, the horrors unseen. And in the aftermath, the void was silent, save for the drifting remnants of fleets that had underestimated them. Humanity had made a decision long before the first shot was fired. The world they loved would never be harmed, and the universe would learn, too late, that humans fight not to conquer, but to protect. This was the day the battle never reached Earth, and yet it left the galaxy changed forever. After the battles, after the fleets lay broken and empires dissolved, the galaxy waited. We expected domination, submission, vassalage, a new human empire to replace those we had relied upon for centuries. It never came. The humans did not occupy, they did not govern. They dismantled hostile administrations with precision, neutralized threats, and then withdrew. Infrastructure was repaired, trade routes reopened, communications restored. Planets once under tyrannical control were left to self-govern, though human advisors remained, to guide, not dictate. We tried to understand the logic. We asked, interrogated, and debated. Why leave control in the hands of those they had defeated? Why not take everything, as every conquering species would? A human commander answered with a simplicity that stunned even the most learned scholars. Because that isn't why we fight. It was not ambition that drove them, not hunger for territory, not greed, not revenge. Humans wielded power differently. Power was not entitlement, it was responsibility. It was a burden reluctantly carried, exercised only to protect, to preserve, to ensure survival for those who could not defend themselves. We cataloged every conquered world, every liberated city, every regime dismantled. We noted patterns, doctrines, and post-conflict operations.
Still, the conclusion remained the same. Humanity did not seek supremacy. They sought balance. They corrected, then retreated, leaving the galaxy to carry on, wiser but unsettled, under the quiet shadow of their presence. And in that shadow, we finally understood something fundamental. Humans are not conquerors. They are custodians of consequence, guardians who intervene only when necessary and withdraw when the obligation is fulfilled. We waited for oppression. They offered restoration. We anticipated chains. They offered guidance. And in every measured action, we glimpsed the principle that would define them for all time. Power is never claimed. It is assumed when the need arises, with exacting responsibility. The galaxy had survived humanity's wrath, yet it was humanity's restraint that terrified us most. Human children are taught history not as a parade of victories, but as a ledger of consequences. They walk through ruins, the shattered cities of their own past, the remnants of worlds they touched, and even the decayed shells of alien civilizations they corrected. Every broken structure, every scarred landscape carries a story, a warning of what happens when empathy is abandoned, when cruelty is allowed to flourish, when the fragile is ignored. Lessons are not abstract, they are visceral. Children touch the walls still warm with memories of suffering, hear whispers carried in recorded voices of those who perished, and witness holographic reconstructions of disasters averted and catastrophes endured. They learn that survival is not granted, it is earned, maintained, and defended with unflinching responsibility. Above all else, one rule is taught repeatedly until it becomes instinct. Never strike what humans love. It is a rule not framed as a threat, but as principle, a measure of their moral calculus. Humans understand that love, whether for family, planet, or idea, is a force more potent than any weapon, and they teach their young that the violation of that force will always bring consequence. This lesson is no longer confined to Earth. Across the stars, human advisors ensure that children of other worlds, those in colonies, those on allied planets, learn the same code. It is instilled not as fear, but as clarity. Civilizations that might one day come to know humanity firsthand learn restraint, empathy, and respect. Humans are guardians by choice, not by conquest. Their power is defined by what they protect, rather than what they take.
And so, as the children of Earth grow, they carry forward a legacy that extends beyond technology, beyond fleets, beyond interstellar dominance. They carry a warning. Empathy is not weakness. Love is not negotiable. And the galaxy will learn, sooner or later, that humans, through their children, never forget what they are sworn to defend. Humans did not seek extermination. That is a truth we learned too late. and even now it remains difficult to comprehend fully from an alien perspective. Every other species we have observed, every predator, every empire, every civilization with the power to dominate, acts from desire. Desire for territory, for security, for power, for revenge. Humans, by contrast, act from necessity. They act because something must be done, because something cannot be left unresolved. And once the necessity is removed, their action ceases. There was a moment after the fleets had been shattered, after the tyrannies had collapsed, after the systems were stabilized and the wounded tended to, when the galaxy expected the humans to move again. There were whispers in council halls, rumors in the voids between star systems, fears in every archive. Surely they will not stop. They have the capability, they have the momentum, they have the numbers. Surely they will claim dominion, as every other conqueror would. They did not. We observed their forces retreat to their home systems. Ships limped into dockyards, hulls scored with fire, electronics sparking, crews fatigued, yet unbowed. Yet they did not press further. Humans did not send fleets to finish what had begun. They did not establish empires in place of those they had dismantled. They did not erect monuments to their victories, nor write treaties that demanded submission. They stopped. And the galaxy misunderstood that stillness. We called it hesitation. We called it indecision. We called it weakness. We cataloged it as error, as opportunity, as pause before escalation. But it was none of these. Humans stopped because there was nothing more that needed to be done. Not because they were weak, not because they lacked the capacity to obliterate opposition, not because they feared reprisal or consequence. They stopped because they were done. They had measured the suffering, calculated the necessity, and acted with precision. Every intervention had a limit, every strike a purpose. They did not act for pride, for conquest, or for amusement.
Every engagement, every liberation, every correction was finite, bounded by principle. Once the necessary had been accomplished, the obligation ended. And humans, unlike any other species we have cataloged, have the capacity to recognize that completion is enough. They do not linger. They do not escalate beyond the point of necessity. They do not continue for the sake of power. In observing them, we realized the enormity of this restraint. For centuries, the galaxy had assumed that ultimate power, once obtained, would inevitably seek expansion. Empires, predators, even cooperative species all acted from momentum compounded by fear and ambition. Humans defy this pattern. They act only to the extent that action is required. Once necessity ceases, their wrath, their strength, their unmatched resolve recedes. They step back. They allow the galaxy to heal, to function, to continue. It is a discipline of will beyond comprehension, a moral calculation so precise that we, who rely on instinct, ambition, and fear, cannot even measure it. They do not act for the joy of domination. They act to correct what must be corrected. Once corrected, they leave, uncelebrated, unobserved, their duty complete. In that, they are terrifying. Because the moment you believe they will continue, they do not. And the moment you believe they are done, they are still prepared. Always, always prepared. And so, the galaxy came to a realization it had never before considered. Humans do not wage war to conquer. They do not fight to dominate. They do not intervene to rule. They intervene because they must. They fight because they are compelled. They act because there is no other choice. And when choice returns, when survival is assured, when necessity ends, they stop. Not out of mercy, not out of weakness, not out of mercy disguised as weakness, but because they are done, because the ledger of obligation has been balanced, because the suffering that could be prevented has been prevented, because the tasks that must be completed are complete. They stop. And the silence that follows is more unsettling than the fury that preceded it. A galaxy once trembling before human resolve learns with slow, dawning horror that humans do not escalate unnecessarily, but that when they act, every action is absolute, every decision final. And when they choose to stop, it is not a promise, it is not negotiation, it is certainty. The humans had endured, they had corrected. And now, they were finished. Finished, not because they lacked the power to continue. Finished not because they feared. Finished because necessity itself had ended. And that, above all else, is why humanity stopped. Because they were done. Not mercy, not weakness, just the quiet, terrifying completion of purpose. Now I speak as an archivist, a recorder of what remains of a civilization humbled, reshaped, and forever marked by the presence of humanity. From my vantage among the stars, I see their fleets moving silently, their worlds thriving, their colonies spread, not as conquerors, not as empires claiming dominion, but as guardians. Forged in the crucible of loss, humans carry both the scars of what they have endured and the weight of what they have chosen to protect. They ask for little: respect, boundaries, the simple preservation of what is innocent, what is cherished, what cannot protect itself. They do not demand allegiance, tribute, or worship. They do not seek empires to govern. Their insistence is subtle, almost imperceptible, yet absolute. Harm what they love, and the universe will answer. Ignore them, and they endure. Patience is woven into their very being. The galaxy has watched entire threats fade into obscurity because humanity chose not to act until necessity demanded it. They wait, they observe, they calculate. But make no mistake, this is not hesitation, it is deliberation. Their restraint is the measure of their power. But threaten what they love, and they will arrive. Not with ceremony, not with fanfare, not with the chaos of those who act for pride or conquest. They arrive with inevitability, calculated, precise, efficient. Every movement, every strike, every intervention has purpose, bound to principle, guided by unerring moral and ethical vectors that we as alien observers cannot fully predict. And yet, what they leave behind is not ruin, it is correction, restoration, preservation. Systems are healed, tyrannies undone, lives saved. And humanity recedes, leaving only a lesson writ across the void of space. Do not mistake mercy for weakness. Do not mistake patience for apathy. Do not mistake restraint for impotence. The humans are neither conquerors nor emperors. They are custodians, guardians, keepers of balance. And across the stars, civilizations have learned this lesson in ways they will never forget. Ignore them, and they endure. Threaten what they love, and they will arrive. And when they arrive, the universe remembers.
Always.